For a lot of people out there, Armored Core 6 might be your very first foray into the series, and seeing as how there's a lot of differences between the way Armored Core plays and your standard Soulsborne Ekiro Ring series plays, you're probably going to run into some walls and some issues that you don't quite know how to surmount. But worry not, I'm here to give you some tips on how, as a new player, and maybe as a returning player as well, you can find success in Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon. Let's begin. Hello everyone, my name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. If you find this video useful or entertaining or just enjoyable to watch in any way, a like, a comment, and a sub would be very much appreciated. I'm a small creator trying to make YouTube my full-time career, and I could use all the help that I could get to grow in the space. Thank you very much. First and foremost, it is absolutely vital that you are not afraid to experiment with new builds. The entire idea behind Armored Core is customizing your personal mech, your personal core, to suit the playstyle that you find the most enjoyable or the easiest to work with, the most compatible with you. And you can't do that if you're afraid to experiment with new weapons or leg types or weight capacities or what have you. And in Armored Core 6, it's all the easier to perform those experimentations. You see, in games in the past, when you bought a new part, if you took it even out on one mission, you could only then resell it back to the shop for half of its original price. But in Armored Core 6, that's no longer the case. Now, any part that you've purchased or earned or found elsewhere can be sold for 100% of its purchase price, meaning that there is absolutely zero punishment for buying a bunch of new parts, building a new core, taking it out on a mission, realizing, wow, this really just does not gel with me. I'm not vibing with the way this machine works. Selling it all, starting from scratch. This is great because there's a huge number of parts in Armored Core 6. I'm only in Chapter 1, and I've already got a very good variety of stuff to work with. I can only imagine some of the stuff that I'll find later on in the game. And I mean, how can you find out what works if you are punished for trying to experiment with it by suddenly not having any money? Some of these parts are very expensive, so being able to sell stuff to buy them is very, very important. Try out new types of legs, try out different types of playstyles, long range, high maneuverability, high armor, all that type of stuff. Use different types of weapons, shotguns, laser missiles, a missile battery build, or a close range machine gun build. There's so much cool stuff you can do. Don't miss out. You're going to lose a huge chunk of the Armored Core experience if you find one build that you kind of like and just stick with it and upgrade it over the course of the whole game. Number 2, speaking of being able to experiment with new builds, make sure that you do your training missions to get new parts. This is a concept that's introduced very early on, and even as a veteran, you want to make sure that you're going in and doing these training missions. They're presented to you periodically over the first few missions of the game, and they teach you a lot about quick boosting and dodging attacks, managing energy, how to make different types of builds, how charge attacks work with different weapons, all sorts of good stuff. And while a lot of that is information that you'll probably pick up naturally as you play, there are some nuggets that are quite valuable to get, and more importantly, for completing these missions, the game will reward you with new, very powerful parts. In fact, my very first new generator, FCS, and booster all came from doing these training missions, and let me tell you, those are massively important parts to be able to upgrade. They are, no pun intended, the core of any good build. And speaking of, number 3 is prioritize utility parts like generators and boosters for upgrades. As I mentioned in the previous point, these core aspects of a build will make or break its viability in the middle of combat. You might have the strongest, sexiest, most awesome looking core on the block, but if it doesn't have a good generator to power all of your insane weaponry and make sure that you're able to boost around the battlefield and avoid attacks, you're going to be destroyed in seconds. Similarly, if you don't have a booster that can keep up with the weight or the combat maneuverability of your core, you're just not going to be able to move as quickly or as efficiently as you'd like. And without the right FCS to be able to target different types of enemies or use different types of weapons, you're just going to be in a bad spot overall. So before you spend money on that fancy new weapon or upgrading your legs or your chest piece or what have you, spend on the vitals, spend on the fundamentals. Make sure that those things are up to snuff, and you're going to have way more fun and be far more effective overall. Speaking of the right FCS, make sure you're using the right FCS for the job. That's point number 4. As I mentioned in the previous point, Your FCS is going to have a huge impact on your combat viability because the FCS is typically tuned for a particular style of play. You can have close range FCS lock on that will make it so that the mech will actually turn and target things before you can even adjust your camera to do so when you're in close range combat. Or maybe you need something that is going to have effective targeting for your long range missiles. If you're doing a missile battery type build, you're going to want to make sure that your FCS can actually keep a lock on and make sure that it brings your missiles home after you fire them. I had a low missile compatibility FCS for a little while, and it was hysterical to watch my missiles just land meters or yards or yalms or however you want to phrase it away from my target when realistically they should have been able to land without any issue. They weren't even dodging, they just whiffed. It was really, really bad. So make sure that you're using an FCS that matches the type of build that you're going for. Number 5, save multiple AC builds for different mission types. This kind of goes hand in hand with point 1, but you want to make sure that you have different builds available for quick swapping to different types of missions. For example, I was using a pretty heavy tank build with a lot of heavy artillery and high armor for a little while, until I ran into a mission where I needed to quickly be able to jet around the battlefield on a timer and collect data logs to get the maximum reward for the mission. Obviously, a tank leg wasn't going to be very efficient for that. So what I did was I went into my actual saved builds, saved that tank build for later, and then built a super lightweight, high-speed core from the ground up to zip around the battlefield and collect those data packets. Having both of those builds saved means that if I ever encounter a similar situation where, say, I need more heavy firepower and more armor to handle a barrage of attacks, I can switch from that lightweight build back to my tank build without spending 10, 15, 20 minutes in the shop selling and buying and re-equipping and re-customizing an entire core. And it's nice because even if you sold the parts that you needed for one build in order to fund another, so long as you have the funds on hand later, you can actually just go in and rebuy all the parts through your saved build menu. And it'll be put together. No customization required. It'll just be there, ready for use. Very, very handy. Nice quality of life change. Number 6, we're getting more into the combat side of things now, with save big attacks until you stagger the enemy. A new feature of Armored Core 6 is the incorporation of a sort of Sekiro-style stagger bar, wherein as you land attacks on the enemy, or the enemy lands attacks on you, a bar will fill, and if it gets filled up, the recipient of all of those attacks will become staggered for a short period of time. This is a very narrow window, but during that window, all of your attacks will deal more damage, essentially crits, and you will be able to lay the hurt on or potentially get destroyed, depending, when this stagger meter is full. To facilitate that, weapons that have a long recharge rate or long reload rate, like, say, a charged laser weapon or a heavy grenade launcher, are weapons that you're going to want to save, if at all possible, for when that stagger bar is full. Again, your window of opportunity to deal damage here is very, very slight. So using some rapid-fire weaponry like a machine gun or a pulse cannon to stagger the enemy and then laying into them with that charged laser shot or that heavy grenade launcher will deal so much damage. Like, you will annihilate chunks off of enemy health bars by timing your attacks properly like this. So it's not always going to work out that way. Sometimes you might need that heavy weapon to be able to get a stagger on the enemy, but when you can, try and save those attacks so you can really lay in when it counts. Continuing on with our combat tips, number 7, practice strafing to dodge missile attacks. One of the most common attacks that you're going to see in the game that will really put the hurt on if you aren't able to avoid them is missile and rocket barrages. Pretty much all enemies from the start of the game have some sort of option for a missile or rocket attack, and these are attacks that can quickly stagger you, build up the heat gauge on your core, and just generally deal more damage than your standard ballistic weaponry will. Fortunately, cores are very, very fast, and as you've probably known if you've watched any sort of action movies or played any sort of action-y sci-fi game, the best way to avoid a missile is by moving extremely quickly, faster than it can track you. In Armored Core, same thing. By strafing left and right during missile barrage attacks, you can quickly boost out of the way of big barrages. The very first boss in the game, the PCA Heavy Attack Helicopter, has a number of missile barrages, and it might seem overwhelming trying to deal with it at first, but if you start to quickly circle strafe around the arena, you'll see so long as you stay on the move and don't really stop, most of those attacks will just naturally miss you because they can't keep up with your speed. Even if they can, that's where your quick boost can come into play, where at the end of your circle strafe, right before the missiles hit you, you've got just enough of a window of opportunity to quick boost out of the way, get that extra little bit of distance that you needed, and stay safe and keep your AP high. So it's a technique that takes a little bit of getting used to, especially if you're trying to keep your targeting on and keep the enemy in your sight so you can still be dealing damage, which you definitely need to be able to do. But once you get the hang of it, it feels pretty natural, and it really encourages you to stay mobile and aggressive, which is the Armored Core way. And finally, number 8, replay missions for practice and extra money. This is actually something that I only realized after the end of my first stream when I was noodling around and getting some footage for my other videos. And you can actually go in to the sortie menu and replay missions to get higher ranks, which is really cool. It's nice to be able to practice your skills, test out new cores, see how you've gotten stronger compared to earlier missions that you maybe struggled with. But what's extra nice is that each time you complete one of those missions, you actually get paid the same amount of money that you got paid the first time you did the mission. It takes out the cost for your ammo and your repairs, of course, but like, you can just grind forever. Is that exciting? I mean, if you're practicing with new builds or honing your skills, trying to get S ranks, sure, that can be exciting and it's a nice little reward. But even if you aren't interested in doing that kind of grind for rank, just getting that extra experience and getting more money to buy new parts with is massively valuable, because again, going back to point 1, not being afraid to experiment with new builds and having the money to experiment with those builds is massively valuable. So if you have a little bit of time, or maybe you're stuck banging your head against a tough boss or a difficult mission, go replay some old ones, hone your skills, try some new things, try some new builds, and get a bunch of money so you can buy some better parts. It might be the edge that you need to take on whatever it is that you're stuck against. And that is my first 8 tips for Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon. Thank you all so much for watching. I do very much appreciate it. As I play more of the game, I'm sure there will be more information that I can glean that I can deliver to all of you, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of that. If there is any topics for Armored Core that you'd like to see me cover, I'd be happy to do so. Drop it in the comments so that I know. I'll be doing boss guides, build guides, all that type of stuff, so long as there's interest in it, so let me know. If you have a friend who's been playing Armored Core and struggling, or maybe is new to the series and you want them to have a little bit of a guiding hand to get into the game, send them this video. And overall, I hope that you all are enjoying the game, because I'm absolutely loving it. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. Bye now.